Hello everyone, Wendy here. Sorry, I hope that worked okay because there was just a blip in my connection. I hope everything's cool. Thank you for joining me. We told the social media webs that I was going to do an Alignment 101 Facebook Live, and we've had a ton of questions. We always get lots of questions on alignment, and so I'm going to get through your questions. I'm going to explain and hopefully demystify and get through a lot of, I know there's a lot of overwhelm very often with the whole alignment issue, like what does it mean, why is it important, am I doing it right, what's it got to do with postpartum recovery, and I want to kind of get you to a place where you understand what alignment means, where you're trying to sort of work towards in terms of an ideal kind of place, if such a thing exists, and also to kind of establish a kind of calm place about it. And I say that because I know a lot of you get really worried about feet and alignment and stuff and worry that you're doing it right or not. So that's what we're going to cover today. Now, first of all, I've got lots of questions. I've got questions that came in on Instagram, questions from Facebook, and we had a ton of emails as well. So I've got them in front of me. I hope I'll get through them. Let's start with what does it actually mean? So alignment, it's kind of a bit of a buzzword. There's a lot of talk about alignment online and in the sort of health and wellness and fitness areas. So let's start with a few sort of definitions. So a lot of people often say, is it posture? Well, yes and no. So if we're going to be pedantic about the words, then posture is kind of how you're, I'll give you an example. A ballerina has a certain ideal posture. A gymnast has a certain ideal posture. A soldier has an ideal posture. None of those have anything to do with alignment, okay? They are sort of, if you like, sort of false positions that our body is put in to be ideal for a certain activity or job or sport. Alignment is kind of much less subjective than that. Alignment is very objective. Alignment literally means how your body is biomechanically aligned. That means how your bones and your muscles and your tissues and your structures are stacked on top of each other. Okay, so that's kind of the difference between alignment and posture. One is subjective, the other is more objective. Now, probably the biggest question is, I've come to MUTU system because I want to talk about, I want to improve my tummy, I want to talk pelvic floor issues. These are the kinds of issues that a lot of people find MUTU system for. And then they find that in the program and in a lot of my discussion and advice, I'm talking about the way you walk, the way you stand and your alignment. So you're thinking, what the heck has alignment got to do with my tummy and my pelvic floor? Quite a lot, since you asked. So I'm going to explain. For our bodies to get to where we want them to be, when we're talking about postpartum recovery and we're talking about getting a core and a pelvic floor that function and work again in an optimal way and like we want them to. If we want those systems to work, they need to be in a position where they can. So if we're asking our bodies to perform activities or functions that should be unconscious, they should be natural functions of our body. If we're asking our body to do these things, but we're not aligned in a way that means that our body can, then we're kind of pedaling and going nowhere. It's the same principle as I often say, exercising harder is not the solution. Exercising smarter, exercising differently is. So if our body is literally in a position where it cannot optimally perform those functions, then if you're exercising in that alignment, moving every day in that alignment, lifting, walking, sitting, standing in said alignment, then you cannot expect your body to be able to do those functions properly. So I hope that makes sense. It's kind of, we have to help our body to recover and get in and to be able to work by putting it in an optimal position so it can. So what does it actually mean? Well, or how do you, that's kind of what it's got to do with postpartum recovery. And the question I'm probably, or one of them I'm very most often asked is how do I know if I'm getting it right? How do I know if I'm in correct alignment? What does it look like? What does correct alignment look like? So before I go into the questions that you've asked me, I'm going to kind of go through a few like checkpoints, a few, you know, that like check in on this, check in on this, check in on this. And before I go into those, I want to say again, and I say this a lot on the blog and in the program, but please don't get too hung up about these things. Don't get paranoid about them like, oh my God, my entire body's in the wrong place. Your body's not in the wrong place. It just needs to kind of, in order to function and work and look the way you want it to, you might have to make some adjustments to kind of give your body a break and allow it to do those things. Now, the best way to, I'm also going to give you a ton of resources, by the way, as well, if you want to dig deeper or whatever. So the best place to start when you're thinking about alignment and how is my alignment, am I in the right place? Start at the bottom, start on your feet. All right, so we do a lot about feet in MUTU system, and we talk about shoes, and there's a couple questions about shoes and barefoot and stuff, which I'll get to, but let's just start with where your feet should be. So if you can stand right now while you're watching this, stand up. And ideally you should be in bare feet, or at least in socks, not in shoes, okay? And look down at your feet as you're standing. Now, your feet should be pointing straight ahead. So when you're walking, your feet should point straight ahead. But if you look at your own feet while you're walking around later on, and you look at other people's while you're out and about, what you'll notice is that very many of us don't actually walk with our feet facing straight forward. We walk, or probably one of the most common ones is like duck feet, sticking out to the sides. So that's just like a really simple adjustment you can start to be aware of. The first stage is simply being aware of it, like check in, notice where your feet are, because you've probably never thought about which way are my feet pointing when I walk. It's probably never occurred to you. So start noticing, just start noticing. So when you're walking, when you're standing, look down, your feet should point straight ahead. Now, a good way to check on that is if you're in on a floor, like a hard floor with tiles or lines or planks of wood, so that, and what you want to do is kind of line up the outside of your foot on the straight line. Now, if you've got a very sort of fleshy outside of the foot, you're going to feel like you're really standing the opposite, like pigeon-toed, as they say. You're going to feel like they're pointing right in. So don't kind of go from there to there and wonder why that feels weird or that things hurt the next day. This is gradual and just something to start noticing. But what we're looking for is pointing straight ahead, all right? So that's the first place, feet. Now the one to come up is kind of how you're standing, how you're holding your weight as you're standing. So we'll come on to walking and things, but let's just think about standing for a minute. When we're standing, let's come back to the soldier or the gymnast in their perfect soldiering or gymnastic posture. That posture is chest out and weights forward. So while you're watching this, stand up and stand in absolute gymnast or posture stance. Now what you'll notice is that your weight, your body weight, has kind of rocked forwards to the point where you can hardly really lift and wiggle your toes because all your weight is forward. So what you want to do is try to back up the weight. So by back up, I mean put the weight down through the middle of your heel rather than through the ball of your foot or your toes. Yeah, so, and what you'll find is that to do that, you kind of almost feel like you're almost rocking your body back on itself, back on its axis. So your feet should be pointing pretty much straight ahead and your weight should be back up over, if you imagine a midpoint of your heel on the floor, sort of that's like where your leg bone goes, right? So your leg bone goes straight down. You can see where your leg bone hits your foot, right? At your ankle. Round about the middle of that, that's where the weight should be focused, not all the way forward. So when you're standing in better alignment, your feet are pointing forwards and your weight is in a place backed up, pelvis back over your ankles, backed up so that you can wiggle your toes. So you should be able to lift and wiggle your toes while you're standing in that position. All right, so feet up to weight and how it's being, how that weight is being transferred down to your feet, all the way down your legs to your feet. So coming further up, let's talk about pelvis. Now, I often talk, you'll hear me talk a lot in cueing for exercises and things in MUTU, and for all elements of standing, sitting, etc. is you'll hear me talk about tucking your pelvis, as in don't. Now, I don't know about you, but I was showing, this is the age giveaway as well. Don't know if you did all the aerobics classes of the 80s, but I did. 80s and 90s, all the aerobic stuff and the step stuff, and we were always being told, weren't we, to tuck your tailbone under. You've probably heard that phrase, and if you're a dancer, or if you have a background in that kind of, or going to those sort of classes and things, we were often told tuck your bum under, tuck your tailbone under, tuck your pelvis under. So that's a position that unfortunately an awful lot of us have got ourselves in. And do you know what the result of that is? The result of that is bums that are kind of flat rather than nice and curvy. The result of that is also a pelvic floor that doesn't work very well. And I'll come back to that as to why that position of your pelvis is negatively affecting the effective function of your pelvic floor. So you end up with this sort of flat backside, a kind of flat backside, because you've tucked in underneath. Yeah, that's what we want to try and get away from. We want to really try and lose that old cue, that sort of that old way of thinking and way of positioning ourselves, because that tucked under is really not good for our alignment. Let me explain why it's not good for your pelvic floor. If you can imagine, that your pelvic floor, it starts at the front, it connects at your pubic bone right at the front, and it goes right underneath you back towards your tailbone. Yeah, so it's kind of underneath you like that, front to back, back to front. Now, if your pelvis is tucked under, if you tuck your bum under the whole time, what you've done is shortened that muscle. Yeah, so the muscle that should be here, sort of front to up around your up by your tailbone, you've shortened it. You've brought the two ends closer together. Now, so you've contracted the muscle, you've tightened the muscle, not strengthened the muscle. We've talked about this before. A tight muscle is not a strong muscle. A tight muscle is ineffective, or it certainly can't work optimally. So what we've done, if we've shortened that pelvic floor distance from front to back, we're not working with the pelvic floor in its full range. So it kind of can't go anywhere when it needs to contract or tighten. Now, I discussed this in a previous Facebook Live when we talked about pelvic floor and a hypertonic or tight pelvic floor. If a muscle is permanently shortened, it can't go anywhere. So when you need it to work, it can't go anywhere. So your alignment is literally directly affecting how well your pelvic floor can do its job. So it's not just affecting the way that your body looks and walks and moves, but it's literally affecting whether or not your core can do its job properly. So we don't want the pelvis tucked under, okay? We want that out and proud. We want your backside where it's supposed to be. What we're also doing when we tuck under all the time is we're kind of not using our glutes, not using our butt muscles, and we need those. We need our butt muscles for a strong pelvic floor, for a strong core, and because it looks better, okay? You know, if you're going to get into the aesthetics of things, who wants a flat backside? Nobody needs a flat backside. It's a friend to no one. So pelvis not tucked under, all right? So to recap, bottom up, feet pointing straight ahead, weight down through the back end, the back half of your foot, not the front half of your foot, so that you can wiggle your toes. Pelvis untucked, and neutral. So when I say neutral, a really nice pointer for this is pubic bone, all right, bony bit at the front, and your two, they're called the ASIS, or we would often say our hip bones, the bits that you can feel sticking out at the front on either side of your hips. So that's a triangle, right? Two hip bones, pubic bone at the front. Now, if you turn side onto a mirror when you're standing, And those 3 points should be in a vertical plane. So by that I mean they should be, the hip bone should be directly above the pubic bone. If your pelvis is tucked right in underneath, your pubic bone is going to be sticking out at the front, jutting out in front of your hip bones. You kind of have to do this for this to make sense. Stand up and find where your hip bones are, and then tuck, really exaggerate it, tuck your backside right in underneath you. And your sort of hips will thrust forward, your pubic bone will come out in front. So you can see that that's out in front of your hip bones, yeah? And then you can completely exaggerate it the other way around. So really stick your backside out behind. Now, if you feel and look, your pubic bone has now gone behind, yeah? It's no longer underneath your hip bones, it's out behind it, yeah? So that's sort of when you thrust your hips under, forwards or back. What you're looking for, a neutral pelvis, is where those 3 points are lined up. Now, it's really hard to tell. Often people will look at you, or you might be looked at from the side, or look at yourself from the side, and you'll kind of think, oh, she's got sway back, or she, it's overly lordotic, etc. You cannot tell this stuff by literally just looking at the curve of somebody's back and backside, because we've all got different shapes and size and body shape backsides, right? So you're not, the much more, again, I said at the beginning, like there's a subjective thing and there's an objective thing. Objective is that those 3 bones are on the same plane. Hip bones, pubic bone. So that's, have a play with that. So if you're doing, for instance, an exercise lying on your back on the floor, obviously they'd be on a horizontal plane, flat, yeah? Hip bones, pubic bone. One shouldn't be sort of dropped or above the other. So that's where your pelvis should be. Have a play with it. It's not going to necessarily look exactly the same on you as it does on somebody else, all right? So, but you can feel those bones, and that's objective markers. And then coming further up, so we've gone we've gone feet, like where your, sorry, just looking at those questions. We've looked at feet, we've looked at where the weight should be, we've come up to the pelvis, untuck it, so come up to the ribs. Now, we often refer in MUTU system to kinky ribs, ribs that are kinked and out of shape. You'll also hear phrases like thrust ribs, rib thrust. What else? There's other ways of, or jutting out, ribs coming out. So what we're talking about there is that the rib cage should be sitting directly over the pelvis. Now, if we come back to our ballerina and our soldier from the beginning, so if you stand and you stand in ballerina or gymnast or soldier pose, your rib cage is way out in front of your pelvis. Have a feel, find the bones. Objective marks. Your bones are much more objective than just looking at the curves of your body. So when you stand in that position, your ribs are way out in front. What we want to do is bring your ribs back and down so they're sitting over your pelvis. If you have a dig in around underneath to find your ribs. Now, if you can kind of hook right in underneath really easily, like get your whole fingers in underneath, then it's highly likely your ribs are kind of sticking out, kinked out more than you want them to be. So kind of settle them back a bit. Settle them back. It's kind of like it's something you just want to play with. It. You're not going to change your alignment like that, all right? This is just an ongoing daily check-in, adjustment, noticing, all right? So this isn't about change these things now, about the way you stand. That's not what talking about alignment is about. Talking about alignment is about noticing it first, noticing it, feeling it, checking in, having a little adjust. All right, that's what we're doing with alignment. So ribs kind of, if they are sticking out in front of you, which is kind of, it's perfectly possible they will be, kind of back and down a bit. And then up to the head. Now, if I turn to the side on for you, many of us, our heads are here, all right, but we want them to be there. So it's a kind of ramping it back. You'll feel like you've given yourself a nice double chin at the beginning. So it's kind of just be aware that we do this, and so many of us do this. I know I'm terribly guilty of this, and actually noticed that I was doing this when I was trying to read something from a long way away, and I needed I needed better glasses because I was kind of straining, so kind of straining forwards like that. We all do it over. If you look at everybody who's out and about and in a restaurant, and when they're supposed to be with their friends looking at their phones, it's kind of here, all right, permanently here. Over our laptops, we're here. So just do it now. Just kind of have a play, like find, is my chin and my head kind of literally jutted out over the front of my neck? And if it is, put it back. All right. These are things that we don't fix our alignment in 12 weeks. We don't fix our alignment in any weeks. We just kind of keep on checking in and noticing. So those are the sort of, start from the floor and go up. So that's to kind of cover off, hopefully, some markers for the never-ending question: what is correct alignment? How do I know if I'm in it? Check in on one thing at a time. Don't kind of think, right, today I'm working on my alignment. Today I am going to fix my alignment. I'm going to put my feet in the right place, my pelvis in the right place, my ribs in the right place, my head in the right. It's not going to happen. So think about one or two things. Think about one thing. One way of looking at it, and a really effective way, is to maybe have a look at all of those things that I just talked about: foot position, pelvis position, ribs position, head and neck. And if there's one that you're really aware of, that is something that you could, that maybe you need to look at, focus on just that one. Focus on just that one. So just check in on that. So don't try and check in on every alignment marker or factor all the time. You'll drive yourself insane. You'll get completely obsessed, very confused, and you kind of won't be achieving much because you'll be too tense. So one thing at a time, check in, all right? But those are some basic kind of fundamentals that you can start with. Okay, so let's have a look at another question. So there was quite a few questions about feet and shoes and barefoot and things like this. So what's the whole barefoot thing about, and why is it supposedly good? Well, by being barefoot, and when we say barefoot, that could mean literally barefoot. So when you're at home, and if that's feasible, and whenever you can be, by all means, try and be barefoot as much as possible. Literally barefoot, which means that our feet have to feel the ground. Our feet have sensations across the whole foot. You're going to feel through your toes. You're going to feel through the soles of your feet, as opposed to being kind of very constricted within shoes. See, most shoes are very restrictive. Even many women are wearing every day shoes that literally put our foot in a position that our foot is not that shape. So if you think about a pointy shoe, a heeled shoe, if you put your foot next to that shoe, they're not the same shape, right? So we have to kind of squidge our foot to get into it. Now, I'm not saying that you would never wear those shoes, or that you would never wear heels or wear the shoes that you like to wear. But just think about the fact that you're putting yourself in a place where your feet can't move or feel or be strong. So make sure you kind of counter that. All right. Again, no need to be totally obsessive about it unless you want to. But trying to, you want your feet to do the job. Now, why? Well, basically our feet, if they're trussed up in shoes the whole time, squidged, too tight, too narrow, heels, toes can't wiggle, not enough width, then like any muscle or functional part of our body, they can't do their thing because, they're not being asked to do their thing. They don't have to do anything. If a foot is tight in a shoe, it's not moving, it's not doing anything. So this is why the transition from going from a normal shoe, if you like, an everyday conventional shoe, to something, or a pointed one, a heeled one that doesn't let your foot act naturally, the transition from that to a shoe or no shoe where your foot can do its thing, remember you've just asked ton of muscles and ligaments to do something that they've not been asked to do before. So like any part of your body, if you suddenly ask it to do all these things, it's going to get tired. It might ache a bit. It might, and if you force it to do those things, you know, sort of all at once, if you throw yourself into that, it's going to hurt. You're going to cause pain. So if you are considering sort of starting to wear more minimal shoes, barefoot shoes, then it must be a gradual transition. Gradual. There was, I remember some time back, there was this big sort of controversy online that, oh my God, these barefoot shoes are really bad for you. I threw away my Nikes, I put on barefoot shoes and I ran a 10K and my feet are killing me. My knees are knackered. Well, of course they are, because like you went from like 0 to a 10K in bare feet. It has to be gradual. So, and especially if you're a runner, this is really important. You must do the walking thing first. You literally have to go back to basics. All right. So barefoot shoes, minimal shoes. Let's talk about what that actually means. You don't have to go and spend lots of money on specifically barefoot shoes. There are some lovely brands that we like, and we're going to put some links in so that you can see sort of some of the shoes that we like. But think of it more in terms of the characteristics of the shoe. What characteristics in a shoe are you looking for? Well, the first thing is probably no heel. Yeah, so kind of you don't want to be raised at the back, because that's going to throw your alignment out, like we talked about. As flexible a sole as possible. Just pick up a shoe, excuse me, pick up a shoe that you're looking at in the store and just bend it. Like, does the sole bend? It should kind of bend and fold a bit. The more it folds, the better. If it's really rigid, then that's not so ideal. Yeah. And then the other big thing is the width in where your toes are. So if your toes are able to wiggle and spread in your shoes, that's great, that's ideal. If they're completely squished up, then that's not so good. All right, so those are sort of the characteristics of a barefoot or minimal shoe. You don't have to buy a certain brand. You don't have to, spend a lot of money on a certain type of specialist shoe. It's more about the characteristics of that shoe. So no heel, flexible sole as possible, enough room for your toes, width and wiggle room as possible. All right, so that's kind of what barefoot shoes mean. Let's move on. Got lots of questions here. When I do my daily walk, I'm normally pushing a stroller. Is that an issue? No, that's not an issue at all, because somebody's got to push your stroller. But a few things to think about sort of alignment wise and the way your body's going. If I'm sure you've been there, we all have, and you've definitely seen another mum doing it too, is that kind of pushing a stroller up a hill, shopping bags on the back, it's all heavy, head down, arms on, backside stuck right out, yeah, kind of trudging up the hill. We've all been there. So what you want to do when you're walking with a stroller to kind of really get more out of your walk and put your body in a more comfortable and strong place is kind of come in closer to the stroller, try and kind of stand and walk as upright as you can. So come in a bit closer. So not sort of miles away down here, but more here. Try and kind of, so now let's come on to sort of actually where you're walking. We had a lot of questions about that. There was, I'm trying to get the names here. There was Anna and Arupa who were also asking about earlier on the email. How do you walk? Is there a more ideal way to walk? So let's think about some pointers for alignment when you're walking. So we do quite a few exercises in MUTU system and stretches which are about strengthening the muscles that enable you to walk in a more effective way. When we walk, what we want to try to get away from is that stroller posture that I talked about then, of kind of, pushing along with backside out. Kind of try and bring your hips back in under your ribs, all right, where they're supposed to be, ribs in underneath, and walk, push from the hip, push off from, when you're walking, push off from your toes, and feel your leg swing back and your glute work. Think about that next time you're walking, just that, okay? So instead of thinking about bending a knee and dropping forward. Think more about driving the walk, getting the momentum from the walk by pushing back. Pushing back. So push off from your bent toes, because of course you're in shoes in which you can bend your toes. Push off, legs straight. Feel it in the front of your hip, getting that stretch there, and feel your glute do the work. All right, it's kind of starting to think more about walking with straight legs. Okay, that might sound odd. All right, so you're walking with straight legs. This is why we do the hanging off a step exercise. This is why we strengthen the outside of your hips in some of the MUTU exercises. It's to get your hips, the muscles around your hips and your glutes in a position where they can walk more effectively. So you're driving, glutes doing the work, drive off from your toes. Look straight ahead, body upright, but remember, not chest thrust out in front, ribs back over pelvis. So a few clicks there. I hope they help. What else? I sit at my desk all day. What can I do? Okay, so sitting. We want to sit as little as possible. Sitting is not great. If you think about it, many of us in our culture have got into a daily routine whereby we go from sitting to sitting to sitting to sitting. So that might be sitting in a car or on a train or a bus to commute to work. Then we sit at a desk all day, and then we commute home from work, and then we sit on the sofa or to dinner, and every meal we're sitting and sit. Again, notice first before you try to change or dramatically alter anything to do with your alignment and the way you move and are aligned. Then just start noticing. Think about how much time you spend sitting, and then think about, okay, how can I change that up? How can I move more? So it's not so much this position is a bad position. It's a bad position because you're in it all the time. So if you sit at a desk to work, then there are lots of other ways that you can work. You can have a standing desk. That'd be great. So you need to adjust things. You don't need to invest in anything fancy. I have in my office, I've got a few options in my office here, but I started by literally just putting an upturned wooden box on my desk with the keyboard on that, and then a slightly higher upturned box with my monitor in front of me. So aiming for monitor at eye level, and keyboard there, and you just stand. So you can stand for a bit. I also have a low coffee table height table in my office, and I have lots of bolsters and cushions because this is also my sort of exercise and yoga studio as well. So I'll sit on a cushion on the floor, or I'll sit just on the floor and work with my laptop at this sort of low table. The thing is, when you sit on the floor or when you stand, you tend to move. You tend to move and you shift position a lot. Shifting position is good. So again, it's not really about there being bad positions to be in. It's much more about keep changing it, keep moving, because what we're trying to get to here is a more natural way of being aligned, a more natural biomechanical place. Now, a more natural place does not involve sitting or being in one position for a long time. It involves walking and moving constantly. It involves squatting and lifting and turning and doing all of those things. There are not outlawed moves. You know, it's just finding lots of different ways of adjusting yourself and getting into a different position. Have a stretch. When I'm sat at my low table, sat on the floor, I might be sitting with legs outstretched. I might be sitting cross-legged. I might kneel for a while. You'll move more. You'll find you will move more because you're not sort of in that false position of being in a chair where it just holds you in a place. You know, you'll kind of move yourself. So stand, sit on the floor, change position a lot. Meg's saying get a balance board for the office. Fantastic. Kind of, yeah. So if anything that provides instability to stand on, a BOSU, a balance board, that kind of thing, that's all. It's fun. It gets you moving. It's very easy. And I'm sure if you spend a lot of time at a computer, whether for work or pleasure, it's so easy to just find that you've been in the same damn position for ages. We talked about this last week when I was talking about breastfeeding positions. It's not that there's a bad position, it's that you're in the same darn position, all right? So keep moving, keep stretching, and keep checking in on those alignment factors. So while you're at the office and at your desk, think like, have I spent the last half hour with my head here? Which is perfectly possible. So take a break, ramp your head back, think about where everything's sitting. Is your tailbone tucked right under? Are you sitting on your tailbone when actually you should be sitting on your sit bone? So that's another one. When you do have to sit, the better way of sitting is to sit on your sit bones. Feel underneath for the bony bits underneath your backside. That you sit on them, not on your tailbone. Again, it's that tucked thing. Yeah, untuck and sit on your sit bones. I'm going to do one more question. Okay, there was a question from Carol on Facebook, and she was asking about, so she has had an injury, a torn ankle ligament. She's been told to wear cushioned track shoes with full support to prevent collapsing the arch of the feet. And she's concerned that this doesn't kind of tally with the idea of our feet doing their own thing in a more barefoot environment. So if you are recovering from an injury and the treatment that has been prescribed to remedy that, then run with the remedy that has been prescribed from your medical advisor, please. But what we don't want to be doing is ending up in a position where we're permanently relying on cushioning and support and all of those things, because the only reason your foot arch isn't working is because it hasn't had to. So if we constantly cushion it and support it and do the arching for it, then that muscle's never going to work. Hopefully that makes sense. It's kind of you're splinting a muscle and preventing it from having to do anything by itself. So obviously it's not going to get strong. It's not even working, let alone getting stronger. But, big but, coming back to the gradual. So especially if you're recovering from an injury, so you're coming from sort of, you're not even starting from 1, you're starting from kind of -5. So you've had an injury, there's a problem. In order to treat that problem, you were advised to use support and cushioning. So do that. And then and then do some foot massage while you're recovering, and use your yoga toes. We'll put a link into those lovely little rubber things. Stick between your toes, very nice. Kind of to give your feet a stretch. So work on your feet, stretch your feet, move and mobilize your feet as they're recovering, and very gradually, as your foot recovers, as your injury recovers, Carol, then you can start to move towards being barefoot a bit longer and becoming a bit stronger. All right, the barefoot thing, please go gradual. Do not throw all your heeled shoes away and all your cushioned sports shoes away and buy a pair of Vibrams and then wonder why everything hurts. Okay, please don't do that, or at least don't come to us and say this doesn't work, my feet hurt. Right, I'm going to wrap up because I've gone on long enough. Hopefully I've answered plenty of your questions. Keep leaving them and I'll keep, and we'll check in. Wanted to give you a few resources. Now, if you want to dig deeper on the sort of academic and philosophy, if you like, of biomechanics and alignment, then the undisputed guru and the academic teacher on this is Katie Bowman. So check out that website. The website is nutritiousmovement.com. Check that out. Loads of information on there. She's written a ton of books. You can study with her. So if biomechanics and alignment is a rabbit hole you really want to go down, then don't even think about not checking out Katie Bowman. Some really good stuff, both on an easier to take in level and also on a much more deep academic level. So go in there and take your pick. There's also some other lovely websites. I love Alignment Monkey as well. She's fantastic. We'll put in some other recommendations for great other blogs and websites that we like on that. And shoes. We have Pinterest boards with a ton of recommendations for great barefoot and minimal shoes, and also what we call transitional shoes, like kind of shoes that are not completely cushioned and supported, but are not completely minimal and barefoot either, for you to sort of have that transitional process as well.